Okay, welcome back to Advice to Grad Students, or What I Wish I Knew When I Was a First or Second Year Grad Student. I'm your host, Phil Haun. I'm an alum, and I'm currently at the Naval War College. And I want to throw out a disclaimer that the views expressed here are strictly those of us and not of our institutions. And I'm happy to be joined with me, a dear colleague and friend, Josh Rovner. He's associate professor at American University. Josh, welcome to Advice for Grad Students.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Oh, okay. Not a problem at all. And we'll get right into today's topic, how to read a book. Why did you pick this topic of all the ones I sent? Why are you interested in this one?
I just think it's one of the most important things that we do, right? I mean, most of our job is reading and writing and speaking, but we're not given any sort of instructions on how to read, right? Or what do you do when you get a syllabus and you've got thousands of pages of stuff to get through? How are you supposed to absorb all that? How are you supposed to remember it so that you can recall the things you read, both as a graduate student and in your career afterwards? So I think it's useful to think a little systematically about how to read before you dig in.
Okay, so let's dig right into it. So what advice do you have at this point in a first or second year grad student's life on reading books?
So the first thing I would say is figure out why you're reading this book, right? You might be reading this book because you assume it's going to be on generals, right? And this is something that you're going to have to master in order to get through the program, right? So when you have a book like that, it's really important to as much as possible, commit the big ideas to memory. And what I do is, if I'm reading a book that I'm going to need later, I try to condense it to a single paragraph. Like, I force myself to sit with it and see if I can write the entire argument, right, in a nutshell, right? The main theory, the main argument, an important bit of evidence in support, and maybe a sentence or two on how it fits in with the broader field and broader policy debates, right? This is really hard to do, right? Summarizing a big book in a paragraph is a real challenge, but I find it's really good mental exercise. It forces you to think, why is this book important? Like, why did my professor put this on the syllabus, right? So write it down. And once you have that record, and you can make it a little bit longer if you want, but once you have that record, you're going to start accumulating these little abstracts that you've done yourself, right? Which is giving you that exercise that you need to start to build a stockpile of theories that you can recall later when you need to, right? So if you're reading just on the syllabus, or you're reading in preparation for generals, that's a really good thing to do. If you're reading for your dissertation, if you get to that stage where you know what you want to work on, the sort of big issues you want to work on, you're going to have to go deeper, right? With sort of key books in your area, you're going to have to go through the same process of summarizing the argument in your own word, but in a lot more depth. Like, start to commit the nuances of authors' arguments to memory. Start to commit the historical cases they rely on to memory, right? Because these are the books that you're going to engage with at a much deeper level. These are the people you're going to engage with at a much deeper level, right, in your career. So take their arguments seriously, like really get to know what it is they're trying to say, how they're developing arguments, how the different arguments in your area are connected, and maybe something you think is missing or something that you find problematic about the arguments where you can enter into the debate. One last thing on that, reach out to the author, right? If you think that this is where you're going in your career, and you think that this is the kind of thing you're going to write your dissertation about, send a note to the author and saying, hey, I read your book, I really liked it, I think it's important, and it begged my indulgence, but I have a couple of questions about it. And 9 times out of 10, authors really love getting those emails, right? They love it. They're human beings. They want to know that somebody's on the other end of all of that work, reading and learning. And if you have questions about it, just ask them, right? These are the people that you're going to be interacting with anyways later on, right? So get to know them. Right? The worst that happens is they just don't respond to your email. But I find it's a good way of understanding their work, learning what they mean. And at the same time, you're starting to build a professional network. The last thing, there's a third category, right? So there's reading for generals, reading for your own research, and then just reading for reasons that are unclear, right? You might just find something on the shelf that looks interesting, right? You don't know exactly why it looks interesting, but you get it and you dig into it. And that's fine. I actually think that's important to do, because sometimes, when you're reading a history or reading something a little bit unusual, you'll get some insight. And you're not sure exactly where it's from, or you'll read about a historical case that you hadn't thought about because it's not normally discussed, and it just kind of gets the juices going, right? So when you're reading that kind of book, sit back, relax, and sort of enjoy it, but keep your mind open, because you might find insights there.
Okay, well, I had no idea we were going down the why trail, because my focus is always on the how trail. So can you give some insight into how, on the front end of that, you tend to approach a book?
Okay, so you open the book, right? And always have a pencil. This is just how I do it, right? Oh, you've got a pencil or a pen, and I usually mark the hell out of books, right? Underline things I like, scribble in the margins, pay the money, who cares, right? Just go for it. Unless it's a library book, that's not cool. But scribble on it, post-it notes, whatever helps you commit stuff to memory, right? As you're getting in, the author should give you a good guide in the first chapter, right? A good introductory chapter for a book should give you the argument in a nutshell, right? And it can help you identify what's important and why this book is important. If that's not clear, ask a friend to help, right? It's been very often, Phil, I think I've done this with you, that I won't get it. Like I'll open a book and I'll be reading it, I'm trying to comprehend, and I just don't get it, right? And it's because I've got a very dense mind and I don't get stuff. But that is what it is. So I call and I ask people, like, buy your friend a beer. Like, do you get this? It might be where your friend doesn't get it either, and that's good to know. And you can start discussing it. So ask if you don't understand. One other thing on the how, right? I've mentioned that I read, I summarize, I take lots of notes on the page. The other thing that I do, especially when I think I'm going to need this book later, is I try to explain it out loud without the benefit of notes, right? Just by myself. You pretend that you're teaching this book. Right? Pretend you're in a seminar room and you have to teach Bob Jervis, or you have to teach Debbie Avant, or you have to teach somebody's really important book. It might be that you don't understand it as well as you thought you understood it. The act of having to explain it verbally to somebody else sometimes reveals your lack of understanding, right? So it's a good test. Do I really understand what I'm reading? Do I get the content of this book? Can I explain it out loud? Alternately, you might want to imagine that you're sitting in orals, right? And you're having to explain it to a committee. Right? This is good practice, right? Because they need to know that you understand it. So you might as well practice in advance. So I think those are kind of my basics there.
Okay, so I got enough time to ask one more short question here. Yeah. You've done a really good job about talking about the effectiveness, the outcomes of what you want. Do you have any insight in terms of efficiency? Because I could see grad students looking at a stack of books a mile high and said, how would I ever get through all of these? How do you efficiently approach this?
One thing, again, is to think strategically about why you're reading this piece, right? So if you are reading a book for generals and it's not in your area, right, but it's like a second subfield or something, you probably not going to have the time to sort of go line by line through everything and really commit it to memory, right? So in those cases, understanding the gist of the argument, understanding a little bit of the evidence is okay, right? Read the first chapter really hard, and read strategically for the rest of the book. Again, if you're reading something that's in your area, you just have to find time to do it. You just have to read with care. There's no alternative. And drink lots and lots of coffee.
Okay, well, you have given us a lot to think about here. Thanks for taking the time today on advice to grad students. Any last departing words here before we close out this session?
Enjoy it. Like, you get to read books for a living. That's awesome. There are worse things to do with your day. So enjoy it.
Great advice, Josh. Thanks a lot for being with us today.
Yep.